Okay, so welcome to the Thinking Fast and Slow Learning Lunch. So this is based on Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's a book that I found pretty tricky to get into, if I'm honest. I saw it, it got recommended by a couple of people, and I downloaded it as an audiobook, set about listening to it, got about a chapter or two in, and then realised I was paying no attention to it. So essentially put it down. And then somebody else mentioned it, and I went back to it again, and I started it again a few months later, and exactly the same happened. And then bizarrely, I switched listening speed on my phone, and switching it up to 1.5 times normal speed. I tend to listen to it at 1.25 anyway, but 1.5 times suddenly made this book click. I think it was obviously it wasn't going fast enough for my brain, which is ironic given the name. But I wanted to persevere with it because I kept seeing people I respect massively putting it on their top 10 books of all time. People including Tony Robbins and David Batcher, people I really respected and I knew that read a lot. And Daniel Kahneman, PhD, was also awarded the Nobel memorable prize in economic sciences for the groundbreaking work that went into this book. Him and Amos Tversky, who died in 1996, and in fact who probably would have got the Nobel Prize as well, except for the fact that apparently you can't get a Nobel Prize if you're no longer alive. So Daniel Kahneman was honest enough to admit that this was partly his work. But it's a really well-quoted book. I mean, the number of times you read books, particularly on money, but on all sorts of different walks of life, that quote Thinking Fast and Slow. It is a monumental book that's not necessarily that easy to get into and enjoy, but the concepts in it are really, really powerful. So what are the concepts? Well, I suppose you could sum up the whole book in that we essentially have two brain systems. We have system one, which is our fast and intuition-based system. And so that's the thing that reacts quickly and is our more prehistoric brain, whereas our system two is more thoughtful, it's more slow and decided. So system one is our intuition, system two is our more logical, deliberate way of processing thoughts and thinking things through. So while system one tends to get things done really quickly, it's also prone to making mistakes and oversimplification of complex problems, which is one of the reasons why we test around it in our interview process. System two, on the other hand, can make sense of these complicated issues, but it's often tied down by a slowness of reaction. So success relies upon slow thinking and fast movement, which I think is probably a summary of the entire book. Which, given that it's a long book, you may just want to take that or even the rest of this and go, right, that's it, I've kind of got the concepts. So there's these two systems. System one is quite an amazing system. It is our intuition, and it's why we're rarely stumped in any given situation. Our brain can make split-second decisions without any effort on our part, and with no voluntary control over that aspect of our brain. So it is an incredibly important system, and it helps us in certain situations to stay alive in, I suppose. It's our kind of historic brain that kind of did keep us alive. But it can get us into trouble because it can be emotional. So system one is a remnant of our past, and it's crucial to our survival. Not having to think before jumping away from a car when it honks its horn at you is a good example. Taking your hand away from a burning pot would be another example. So system one controls a lot of functions that we don't even think about that are happening automatically for us. System two, on the other hand, is more about monitoring and controlling suggestions from system one. However, it's often lazy and places too much faith in our intuition, or system one. So system one is this remnant of the past, whereas system two is the brain that has evolved for us, is our human brain, as Dr. Stephen Peters would describe it. So success requires slow thinking. And if you manage to convince yourself that fixing one product problem, or whatever the problem is, by adding a feature will cure all your ailments, then often you ignore the nuances that can actually lead to your success. So it's about system one oversimplifying problems in our life and causing reactions on the back of that. And so these two systems don't work perfectly together. They often fight over who's in charge, and this conflict determines how we act and behave in different situations. Now, when we interview people at Efficient Portfolio, and those of you that have joined us I would say in the last 2 years, will have been through some questions that actually were born out of Thinking Fast or Slow. So let's get you all thinking now just for a second. A cricket bat costs £1 more than a cricket ball. Together they cost £1.10. What is the cost of the cricket ball? So a cricket bat costs £1 more than a cricket ball. Together they cost £1.10. What is the cost of the cricket ball? Well, of course, the obvious answer, the system one answer, is 10p. But actually, when you go back and do the maths, you realise that would mean there was only 90p difference between them. So the actual cost of the cricket ball is only 5p. But it's at that we need to engage system two to find out. Another question we ask is, if it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? So again, the logical answer is 100 minutes. That's what our system one brain is taking us to, because it just stands out as being the obvious answer. The answer is actually 5 minutes when you go back and think about it, but our system one brain led us to the wrong answer. And the final question of this type that we ask in our interview process is, in a lake, there is a patch of lily pads. Every day, the patch doubles in size. It takes 48 days for the patch to completely cover the lake. But how long would it take to cover half the lake? So it takes 48 days to cover the entire lake, and it doubles in size every day. How long does it take to cover half the lake? Again, the obvious answer is 24. It's half of 48. It makes perfect sense. However, with a bit more digging, you conclude that actually, because it's compounding in growth like an investment, hopefully, then actually it only takes 47 days. It takes 47 days to cover half the lake, because of course the next day when it doubles in size, it goes from half the lake to the whole lake. So the reason we ask these questions, and in fact, actually Charlie Kinder, who one of the team at Efficient Portfolio, was the first person to get all of these right. Other people have got them all right in subsequent interview processes. But the reason that it's good for us in the interview process is it starts to differentiate between people that immediately jump to an answer and go, yep, okay, fine. My system one brain says that's the answer. I'm just going to stick with it. Versus the people that are willing to engage their system two brain and go, actually, that might seem a little bit too obvious, and do a little bit more digging, because at that point they tend to find that there is actually a different answer when a little bit more digging. So that comes back to your thinking fast and slow brains. But sometimes our brain perceives problems to be simpler than they are. And I suppose this comes back to those 3 questions. System one thinks it can handle it, even though it actually can't, and you end up making a mistake. So why does our brain do this? Well, just as with habits, it wants us to save energy. The law of least effort states that your brain uses the minimum amount of energy for each task it can get away with. So when it seems that system one can handle things, it won't activate system two. In this case, though, it leads you to not use all of your IQ points, even though you actually need to, but you just don't realize it. So your brain limits your intelligence by being lazy to kind of simplify things. Of course, this absolutely applies to your money. So when it comes to your money, you really got to leave your emotions at home. Even Milton Friedman's research about economics built the foundation of today's work in the field. Eventually we came to grips with the fact that the man or woman who only acts based on rational thinking, first introduced a concept by John Stuart Mill, doesn't quite resemble us. We don't just make rational decisions. We actually make a lot of irrational decisions, particularly when it comes to our money. And this is something that gets talked about in the behavior gap, as well as this concept that's come from Daniel Kahneman and from Thinking Fast and Slow, which is confirmation bias. So with your investments, what we tend to do is we find an opinion about the markets or a stock that we agree with, and we look for further research that confirms our beliefs. What we should do is seek out alternative points of view and have all of the information to make an informed decision using our system 2 throughout the process. Some call this seeing both sides of each trade in the investing world. By seeking out differing views from our own, we can make better decisions without falling into the trap of making our research one-sided. We all know that we kind of confirmation bias influence our decisions in that we find something that we think, oh, I really want that. And then you're kind of constantly looking for things that lead you to that being the right conclusion. The same applies to shopping. You think, oh, I really want that. And then you kind of over time justify why you need it. Another thing that Thinking Fast and Slow talks a lot about is loss aversion. That's something we'll be familiar with, something that we talk to clients about, something that features in our behavioral finance assessment that, of course, we do with clients. So System 1 responds more strongly to losses than it does to gains. Most studies show that losses are twice as powerful as gains on our psyche. Kahneman explains that we either ignore risks altogether from overconfidence, or we give them far more weight than they really deserve. And that's this loss aversion concept. We tend to think and act in extremes because of these two systems. This is another reason that we will continue to have manias and panics in financial markets. We just can't help but get caught up in the cycle, whether that be fear or whether that be greed. That's just the way our brains work. So I want to give you another couple of scenarios to think about, another way of testing the brain a little bit. So in this first scenario, you've been given $1,000. Then you have a second choice. I have a choice to make and that choice is between receiving a further $500 or taking a 50% gamble to win another $1,000. So you've got $1,000 in your pocket just as a free gift. Then you have the choice between receiving another fixed $500 or taking a 50% gamble to win another $1,000. So just make a mental note as to which one of those scenarios you would pick. And then scenario 2 is similar but different. So this time you've been given $2,000, and then you have the choice between losing $500 or taking a gamble with a 50% chance of losing $1,000. So just to reiterate, you've been given a $2,000 check, then you have the choice of losing $500 or taking a gamble with the 50% chance of losing another $1,000. So which choice would you make for each one? Well, if you're like most people, you would rather take the safe $500 in scenario 1, but the gamble in scenario 2. Yet the odds of ending up with $1,000, $1,500 or $2,000 are exactly the same in both scenarios. And the reason that we have this differing approach to these two decisions is because we suffer from loss aversion. We're a lot more afraid to lose what we've already got than we are keen on getting more. And we perceive value based on reference points. So here, starting with a $2,000 check in scenario 2 makes you think you're in a better starting position, which you want to protect. We also get less sensitive about money, with a law called the diminishing sensitivity principle, when we have more of it. So the loss of $500 when you have $2,000 seems smaller than the gain of $500 when you only have $1,000. So you're more likely to take the chance. So you've got to be aware of these things. You've got to be aware of these kind of malfunctions in our brain. Just knowing your emotions, try to confuse you when it's time to talk money or investments, and will help you make better decisions. Try to consider statistics, probability, and when the odds are in your favor, and then act accordingly, because you'll make far better decisions. Don't let your emotions get in the way where they have no business. After all, rule number 1 for any good poker player is leave your emotions at home. And in fact, they go into an example in Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a study of professional golfers, and they analysed over 2.5 million putts to see if golfers had a better concentration when they were putting for par, thus avoiding a bogey and losing a shot, versus putting for birdie and essentially gaining a stroke. And they measured easy and difficult putts from a variety of distances, and the results showed that golfers were much more successful when putting for par than for a birdie. And the conclusion of the study was the fact that it's harder for golfers to accept losing a stroke by missing a putt for par than it is to gain a stroke by making a putt for birdie. So something I'd never thought of before, but loss aversion applies to our mind in so many different ways. And this definitely shows up in our investment decisions when we hold on to losing positions because we don't want to lock in losses. Instead of looking at our holdings objectively and basing the decision on the valuation of the investment, we hope that it will come back to our original cost. And I've seen this so many times with clients talking about just getting back up to where it had originally been. Unfortunately, hope is not an investment strategy. Our tendency is to avert loss, try and have an aversion to loss, and this is a good reason to pay less attention to the market on a daily basis. This is because the pain of seeing frequent small losses exceeds the pleasure from equally frequent small gains. We all know that people, when the markets are down, people log on more often, and then they get more panicky around those losses. But they never are logging in as regularly and never excited. They don't phone us up and say, "Brilliant news, Charlie! My investments are up another £10,000 or £100,000." But they do have a tendency to phone up and say, "Charlie, I'm really worried. My investments have fallen by £10,000 or £100,000." Kahneman suggests only checking your investment balances on a quarterly basis to avoid making System 1 decisions based on daily changes in the market. And this is something that, of course, we advocate in our business. Really checking your investment values once a quarter is perfect. And that's why we send out our investment updates on a quarterly basis too. So using System 1 and making quick decisions is helpful in certain situations, but not necessarily when making long-term, particularly financial decisions. Another highly publicized study in the book looked at the results of 10,000 investor brokerage accounts to see how trading activity impacted investment performance. The researchers looked at 163,000 trades over a 7-year period, and they found that on average, the stocks that investors sold did better than the ones that they bought by 3.2% per annum. They also found that on average, the most active traders had the poorest results, while the investors who traded least earned the highest returns. Men acted on their ideas more often, and therefore women had much better results. And there's actually many studies over the years that have shown that women tend to have a better temperament for investing than men. So this comes back to just, you've just got to accept that the best success you'll get from your investment is long-term strategies. It really is. So when you're making your investment decisions, it makes sense to take your time and allow your system 2 thought process to kick in and help you make more informed decisions. They won't always be right, and they won't always be the right decisions, but having a long-term outlook will serve you much better than thinking short-term about your finances. So it is quite a difficult book to read or listen to, but it is, firstly, it contains some incredible principles that get referred to in countless different investment books and books that aren't investment related. But understanding these irrational decisions that we make and understanding how our brain works between system 1 and system 2 allows us to make better decisions, and also to employ professionals like, for example, in financial services ourselves, to help, again, see through some of these system 1 decisions of, oh, the market's down, I don't want to invest, or all the market's down, I want to take my money out, as opposed to then engaging system 2, really thinking about it through looking at the statistics, the probability, the logic, and saying, actually, the right thing to do is to sit tight. So that's it. That's the Thinking Fast and Slow book by Daniel Kahneman. If you want to know more, it really is worth reading. It is, as I say, quite a challenging read at times, but not from an intellectual point of view necessarily. It's quite laboured on some of the points, but the principles within it are extremely powerful. So there we have it.